Rylara moved through the crowded streets of Zelvek City, keeping her head down. The towering buildings of stone and steel cast long shadows, and the air smelled of burning metal and damp earth. Around her, the auxiliary people, tall, broad-shouldered, and strong, went about their business, paying her no attention. She was used to it. Among the auxiliary, strength was everything. Warriors led their society, fighters were honored, and those with power stood above all. But Rylara was different. She was smaller, weaker. Her thin frame and soft voice made her an outcast among her own kind. To them, she was invisible. Still, she had a purpose. She worked in the background, fixing broken machines, repairing energy lines, and making improvements where no one else could. The great Silari warriors swung their mighty weapons, but it was her work that kept their world running, and no one ever thanked her. Today was no different. She walked toward the power station, where a small explosion had damaged the cooling vents. The warriors had tried to break the stuck panels with brute force, but that only made things worse. Now, they stood around in frustration, arguing over who was to blame. Rylara sighed and stepped forward. Without a word, she knelt beside the control panel, pulled out her tools, and got to work. As she worked, she heard the warriors laughing nearby. "This is what happens when weaklings try to build machines," one of them said. "She should be grateful we allow her to live here," another added. Rylara ignored them. She was used to their words. Within minutes, she had the vents open and the cooling system running again. The emergency lights faded, and the humming of the machines returned to normal. The warriors barely glanced at her as they walked away, acting as if the problem had fixed itself. They never noticed her. But today, someone did. A voice, different from the rough Silari tones, spoke behind her. That was impressive. Rylara turned, startled. Standing there was a human. He was tall compared to her, but smaller than the Silari warriors. His dark brown hair was slightly messy, and his light-colored eyes were filled with curiosity. He wore a traveler's jacket, and a small communication device was attached to his wrist. He smiled. "You did all that in less than 5 minutes, and no one even said thanks." She blinked, unsure how to respond. I don't do it for thanks." The human tilted his head. "Then why do you do it?" Rylara hesitated. No one had ever asked her that before. "Because someone has to," she finally said. He studied her for a moment, then offered his hand. "I'm Daniel Carter. I came here as part of the Human Exploration Initiative, and I think you're the most interesting person I've met so far." Rylara didn't take his hand. Instead, she frowned. "You're wasting your time. The Exilari don't care about intelligence. They care about power." Daniel crossed his arms. "Then they're missing out. Strength isn't just about muscles. It's about making things better. And from what I just saw, you do that better than anyone." Rylara felt something strange in her chest. It wasn't anger or sadness. It was something else. Something warm. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. She looked away. "You don't understand. It doesn't matter what I do. The warriors rule this city. The council listens only to them. I don't belong anywhere." Daniel shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe they just don't see your worth. But I do." For a long moment, Rylara didn't know what to say. Then the ground shook. A deep rumbling filled the air, and in the distance, a bright flash of blue lightning struck the city's northern district. People screamed as alarms blared across the streets. Daniel's expression hardened. That didn't look normal. Rylara's heart pounded. She recognized that energy signature. It was coming from the central power core. If something had gone wrong there, the entire city could be in danger. The warriors rushed past them toward the explosion, weapons drawn. Rylara knew what they would do. They would attack first, think later, and that wouldn't stop whatever was happening. She turned to Daniel. "I have to go." "To fix it?" he asked. She nodded. He smiled. Then I'm coming with you. Relara hesitated. No Xilari had ever wanted to help her before. No one had ever believed in her abilities. But this human, he was different. For the first time in her life, someone saw her worth, and something told her this was just the beginning. The ground shook again, sending small stones rolling across the streets. Relara could feel the pulse of energy deep beneath the city. Whatever was happening at the central power core, it wasn't normal. If the system failed completely, the city's energy shield would collapse. And without the shield, Zelvik City would be exposed to the deadly ion storms that raged across the planet. Relara ran through the streets, her heart pounding. The distant glow of blue lightning flickered in the sky, growing stronger with every second. Behind her, Daniel kept pace, his breathing steady. "You seem worried," he said. She didn't slow down. The power core controls the entire city's energy. If it overloads, the whole system cooled. Another explosion boomed through the air. Relara's eyes widened as she saw smoke rising from the direction of the power station. "They're making it worse," she muttered. Daniel frowned. "Who?" "The warriors," she said, frustration in her voice. "They don't understand technology. If something is broken, they think hitting it harder will fix it." Daniel chuckled. "Sounds familiar." But to Relara, it wasn't funny. This was her home. Even if the warriors ignored her, even if the council never respected her skills, she still cared about the city. And if she didn't fix this, no one would. They reached the entrance of the power station, where a group of Xilari warriors stood. Their massive bodies blocked the doorway, their plasma weapons glowing with heat. The leader, Commander Doric, turned as they approached. His dark red armor gleamed under the emergency lights. "What are you doing here, outcast?" He sneered. His gaze shifted to Daniel. "And why is this human with you?" Daniel crossed his arms. "Just sightseeing." Relara stepped forward. "I need to get inside. If the power core is overloading, I can fix it." Doric laughed. "This is no place for a weakling like you." Another shockwave rippled through the ground. The warriors stumbled, looking around in confusion. Daniel took a step forward. "You can stand here and argue, or you can let someone who actually knows how to help do their job." The warriors glared at him, their hands tightening around their weapons. Daniel didn't back down. His expression was calm, but there was something sharp in his eyes, something that made even the battle-hardened Xilari hesitate. Doric growled but stepped aside. "Do whatever you want. When you fail, don't expect us to save you." Relara didn't waste time. She sprinted inside, Daniel close behind. Inside the power station, the damage was worse than she expected. The control panels sparked wildly, and energy lines pulsed erratically. The giant core at the center of the room, normally a steady hum of controlled power, was glowing dangerously bright. Daniel whistled. "Yeah, that doesn't look good." Relara ignored him and rushed to the nearest terminal. Her fingers flew across the controls, analyzing the data. The core wasn't just unstable. It was on the verge of meltdown. Her mind worked fast. The cooling system had failed, likely due to damage from the earlier explosion. If she didn't restart it manually, the energy buildup would cause a chain reaction. And if that happened, the entire city would be reduced to a crater. Relara grabbed her tools and moved toward the cooling chamber, but Daniel stopped her. "What do you need me to do?" She hesitated. She wasn't used to anyone helping her. Then, she handed him a small power stabilizer. "Plug this into the main conduit and activate it when I say." Daniel nodded. "On it." As he ran to the conduit, Relara climbed onto the cooling system's upper maintenance platform. The heat was intense, and the machinery rumbled beneath her feet. She pried open the coolant regulator, her hands moving quickly. The metal was warped from the blast, making it difficult to realign the control valves. Sweat dripped from her forehead, but she didn't stop. "Daniel," she called. "Ready," he shouted back. She took a deep breath. "Activated. Now." Daniel slammed the stabilizer into place and pressed the activation switch. The effect was immediate. The glowing energy around the core dimmed, and the wild surges of power stabilized. The heat in the room dropped as the cooling system came back to life. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the control panel beeped, indicating that the power levels were returning to normal. Relara let out a breath of relief. They had done it. She climbed down and turned to Daniel. He grinned. "Not bad, engineer." For the first time in a long time, she smiled. "Not bad yourself." Before Daniel could reply, Commander Doric and the warriors stormed inside. Doric looked around, his eyes narrowing. "What happened?" Daniel leaned against the console. "Oh, nothing. Just two weaklings saving your city." The warriors shifted uncomfortably. Doric scowled, clearly not pleased that an outcast and a human had solved a problem the warriors couldn't. Relara braced herself for an insult, but instead, Doric just grunted. "Emph. You were lucky this time." She should have been angry at his words, but instead, she felt something else. Confidence. Because for the first time, she wasn't alone. Daniel clapped her shoulder. "Let's get out of here. I think you just proved you're more valuable than any warrior in this city." As they walked out of the power station, Relara felt something she had never felt before. Hope. And for the first time in her life, she wondered, maybe she wasn't just an outcast. Maybe she was meant for something greater. The streets of Zelvek City were quieter than usual. The power crisis had left many buildings dark, and the people who once ignored Relara now whispered her name. She wasn't sure how she felt about it. As she and Daniel walked toward her workshop, she noticed the way some Siluri citizens looked at her, not with disdain, but with curiosity. Others simply pretended she didn't exist, just like before. Daniel, on the other hand, didn't seem to care. He walked with his usual confidence, hands in his pockets, observing everything. "You really don't like attention, huh?" he asked. Relara sighed. "It's not that. I just don't trust it." Daniel gave a small nod, as if he understood more than he let on. "Well, like it or not, you just saved this city. People will notice." She wasn't sure if that was a good thing. They reached her workshop, a small, cluttered space filled with old machines, tools, and half-finished projects. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She felt at home here. Daniel looked around. "Huh, you really like building things." Relara smirked. "It's what I do. Fixing broken things." Daniel picked up a small mechanical drone, turning it in his hands. "And yet no one saw your worth until now." She paused. His words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Before she could answer, a loud knock echoed through the workshop. Relara tensed. No one ever visited her. Daniel stepped toward the door and opened it without hesitation. Outside stood a Xelari woman dressed in official council robes. Her deep blue scales shimmered under the dim streetlights, and her golden eyes studied Relara with interest. "Relara of Zelvek," the woman said. "The council wishes to speak with you." Relara's hands clenched. "The same council that ignored me for years." The woman didn't react. "They recognize your recent contribution. You have been summoned." Relara glanced at Daniel. He gave her a look that said, "Your call." She exhaled slowly. This was a chance to finally be heard. "Fine," she said. "I'll go." The official turned without another word, expecting her to follow. Daniel grinned. "Looks like you're becoming important." Relara rolled her eyes but couldn't hide the small spark of curiosity growing inside her. The council hall. The council chamber was grand and imposing, built from polished black stone, with glowing blue symbols carved into its walls. Massive Silari warriors stood at attention, their weapons gleaming under the lights. At the center of the room, seated on a raised platform, were the 5 members of the High Council. Relara had never been invited here before. She stood at the base of the platform, Daniel beside her, his expression unreadable. The central figure, Elder Varric, leaned forward. His piercing silver eyes locked onto her. "You have proven yourself useful," he said, his voice deep and commanding. Relara narrowed her eyes. "I saved the city. That's more than useful." A murmur ran through the chamber. No one spoke to the council like that. Daniel smirked. Elder Varric regarded her carefully. "You are bold. That is unexpected." He glanced at the others before speaking again. "The council has decided to offer you a position as a royal engineer." Relara's breath caught. A royal engineer. That was one of the highest positions a auxiliary scientist could achieve. It was a dream she had given up on long ago. But something about this felt wrong. She crossed her arms. "And why now? Why, after all these years of ignoring me?" Elder Varric's expression didn't change. "Because you have proven that you can handle responsibility." Relara looked at the other council members. Some seemed indifferent, others mildly interested. None of them truly cared about her. No one had ever cared. Except, she glanced at Daniel. He wasn't saying anything, just watching, waiting to see what she would choose. The council had never wanted her before. If she took this position, would she just be a tool for them to use? A few months ago, she might have said yes without hesitation. But now, she had a choice, a different path. Relara straightened her back and met Elder Varric's gaze. "I refuse." The chamber fell silent. Even Daniel raised an eyebrow. Didn't see that coming. Elder Varric's eyes narrowed. "You refuse an honor given by the council." "I refuse to be used," Relara said firmly. "You never cared about my skills before. You only care now because you need me." Another murmur ran through the room. Elder Varric's expression darkened. "Be careful, Relara. Refusing the council is not a wise decision." She clenched her fists. "Then maybe I don't need the council." Gasps echoed around the chamber. Daniel grinned. "Now that is the smartest thing I've heard all day." The warriors at the entrance shifted, sensing the tension in the room. Elder Varric's expression remained unreadable. "Then leave. But do not expect the council to recognize you in the future." Relara turned away without hesitation. As she and Daniel stepped out of the chamber, she felt something she never expected. Freedom. For years, she had craved the council's approval. But now she realized she didn't need it. Daniel nudged her. "So what now?" She took a deep breath and smiled. "I think it's time we change this city for the better. On our own terms." Daniel chuckled. "Now that sounds interesting." As they walked into the streets of Zelvek, a new chapter of her life began. And for the first time, Relara wasn't just surviving, she was living. The cold night air of Zelvek City brushed against Relara's face as she stepped out of the council hall. The grand doors behind her shut with a heavy thud, but she didn't look back. For the first time in her life, she had rejected the path others had set for her. And it felt good. Daniel walked beside her, hands in his pockets, a satisfied grin on his face. "Well, that was fun," he said. "I thought you were going to take the job for a second." Relara shook her head. "I spent my whole life waiting for them to notice me. But now I realize I don't need them." Daniel chuckled. "Now you're thinking like a human." She smirked but didn't argue. Maybe he was right. The plan. Back at her workshop, Relara sat at her workbench, surrounded by tools, broken machines, and blueprints. The city's power crisis was improving, but she knew the deeper problems weren't fixed. The council only cared about maintaining power, not improving lives. Daniel leaned against the wall, watching her work. "So, what's next?" Relara tapped her fingers on the table. "We need to make something bigger than just repairs, something that changes the city." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" She thought for a moment. "The power systems here are outdated. The city relies on old energy cores, and the council refuses to upgrade them because they control the supply." She looked at him. "What if we build a new energy source, one that's free for everyone?" Daniel let out a low whistle. "You're thinking of a revolution." She shrugged. "I'm thinking of making life better." Daniel grinned. "Same thing." But they both knew this wasn't going to be easy. A dangerous visit. The next day, Relara and Daniel made their way through the industrial district, heading toward an abandoned energy facility on the outskirts of the city. "If we want to build a new power source, we need materials," Relara explained. "This place should still have old tech we can use." The facility was massive, its metal walls covered in decades of dust and rust. The entrance gate hung loosely on broken hinges, swaying in the wind. Daniel pushed it open with ease. "Ladies first." Relara rolled her eyes but stepped inside. The inside was dark, filled with rows of dead machines and silent generators. She pulled out a small light device and scanned the area. "There." She pointed toward a storage room. "If we're lucky, there should be something useful inside." They moved carefully through the facility, stepping over broken wires and rusted metal. Then, a noise. A faint scraping sound echoed from the far end of the room. Daniel's hand moved to his side, where he carried a small plasma tool, not a weapon, but useful in a fight. "We're not alone," he muttered. Relara tensed. Who would be here? A shadow moved in the dim light. Then, from behind the machinery, a figure stepped forward. It was Xilari, a young male, his clothes tattered, his face thin and tired. His dark scales were covered in dirt and grease, and his golden eyes looked at them with suspicion. "Who are you?" he asked. Relara lowered her light. "We're just looking for parts." The young Xilari hesitated. "You're Relara, aren't you? The engineer who saved the city." Relara was caught off guard. "You know me." He nodded. "People are talking. Some say you're a hero. Others say the council is angry with you." Daniel smirked. "That means we're doing something right." The young Xilari looked at them carefully. "If you're really trying to help, I can show you something." Relara exchanged a glance with Daniel. This could be a trap. But something in the boy's eyes told her it wasn't. She nodded. "All right. Show us." A secret hidden in the ruins. The young Xilari led them deeper into the facility, past broken generators and old reactor cores that had long since shut down. Finally, he stopped in front of a sealed metal door. "I found this weeks ago," he said. "It was locked, but I think it's important." Relara examined the control panel. The lock system was ancient, but still functional. "This place was abandoned years ago," she said. "If there's something still locked inside, it must be valuable." Daniel cracked his knuckles. "Can you open it?" Relara smirked. "Of course." She pulled out her toolkit and got to work. The system was tough, but she was better. Within minutes, the lock gave a soft click, and the door slid open with a low hiss. Inside, the room was untouched by time. And at the center, sitting on a raised platform, was a glowing energy core. Relara's breath caught. This wasn't just any power source. This was a prototype from before the council took control. A forgotten technology that could change everything. Daniel whistled. Well, looks like we just found our revolution." Relara stepped forward, her mind racing. With this, they could build a new power grid, one that didn't rely on the council's control, one that could give everyone in the city access to energy. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just fixing broken things. She was about to build something new. And nothing was going to stop her. Relara stood in front of the glowing energy core, its soft blue light reflecting in her golden eyes. This was more than just a power source. It was hope. Daniel crossed his arms, studying the core. "So, what exactly are we looking at?" Relara took a deep breath. "This is a Zel-Tech prototype core. It was developed before the council took control, but they shut down the project." She looked at Daniel. "With this, we can power an entire district without needing the government's supply." Daniel whistled. "So that's why they buried it." The young Xilari beside them, Vec, looked nervous. If the council finds out you have this, they will come for you. Relara smirked. Then we'll just have to be faster than them. A risky move. They transported the energy core to Relara's workshop under the cover of night. It wasn't easy. The core was heavy and unstable, and if it malfunctioned, it could cause a massive explosion. By the time they reached the workshop, Relara was exhausted, but there was no time to rest. She pulled up her old blueprints. If we modify the distribution circuits, we can set up a secret power grid. Daniel leaned over her shoulder. And once we switch it on, we light up the entire lower district, Relara said. The people will see that they don't need the council's control. Daniel grinned. A revolution through electricity. I like it. But Vec still looked worried. What if they stop you? Relara met his gaze. Then we make sure they can't. The first test. After hours of work, the system was ready for a test run. The core was connected to a small energy grid, and Relara had rerouted power lines to several abandoned buildings in the lower district. She wiped the sweat from her forehead and turned to Daniel. Moment of truth. Daniel flipped the switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the core pulsed. Light flooded the streets outside. Relara and Daniel ran to the window. Buildings that had been dark for years were now glowing with energy. Vec's mouth dropped open. You did it. Daniel laughed. You should never doubt a good engineer. But Relara wasn't celebrating yet. She knew this was only the beginning. Because soon, the council would notice. And they wouldn't be happy. The council strikes back. By morning, word had spread. People in the lower district woke up to find their homes powered for the first time in years. Some thought it was a miracle. Others whispered that Relara was responsible. But the council had also heard the news. In the central tower of Zelvik City, a high-ranking official paced in his office. His dark robes swayed as he spoke into a communicator. Find out who did this, he ordered, and shut them down. Within hours, the streets were flooded with enforcers in black armor, searching for the source of the new power. Relara knew they wouldn't have much time. A desperate escape. Vec rushed into the workshop, breathless. They're coming. They're looking for you. Relara tightened her jaw. We need to move the core. Now. Daniel was already grabbing tools. Where do we take it? Relara's mind raced. There's an old mining tunnel beneath the city. If we get the core there, we can hide it. They worked quickly, disconnecting the core and loading it onto a transport hover cart. Just as they were about to leave. A loud crash. The front door burst open, and armored enforcers rushed in. Stop right there, one of them barked. Daniel acted fast. He grabbed a flash charge from the table and threw it. A blinding light exploded through the room. Relara didn't hesitate. Go. They ran out through the back, pushing the hover cart down the alleyway. Enforcers shouted behind them, but the flash had bought them time. Underground secrets. They reached the entrance of the old mining tunnels, hidden beneath a collapsed building. Vec pressed a control panel, and the old metal doors groaned open. They pushed the hover cart inside just as the doors sealed shut. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Daniel let out a breath. That was close. Relara examined the core. It was still stable, but they couldn't move it again anytime soon. Vec looked at them. What now? Relara smiled. Now we plan our next move, because this wasn't over. This was just the beginning of the fight. Inside the dark tunnels, Relara took a deep breath, her hands still trembling from the escape. The energy core pulsed faintly, casting a soft glow over the metal walls. Daniel wiped sweat from his forehead. Well, that was close. Vec, still shaken, paced nervously. The enforcers won't stop. They'll keep searching. Relara tightened her jaw. Let them search. We're not running anymore. She turned to Daniel. It's time to fight back. A plan for revolution. Relara unrolled an old city map on the tunnel floor. We need to spread power to more districts. Fast. The more people we help, the harder it will be for the council to stop us. Daniel studied the map. We can reroute the main underground conduits. That'll give power to thousands. Vec hesitated. But what if the council retaliates? Relara met his gaze. They already see us as criminals. The only way to survive is to give people a reason to stand with us. Daniel smirked. A citywide blackout followed by a sudden surge of free power. That'll get their attention. Relara nodded. Then let's do it. Spreading the light. The team moved through the tunnels, connecting the hidden energy core to abandoned conduits. It was dangerous work. One wrong move could trigger a surge, exposing their location. Daniel crouched beside a junction box, his hands moving quickly over the wires. Almost there. Sparks flew as he made the final connection. The tunnels hummed with energy. Above ground, lights flickered on across the lower districts. Homes that had been dark for years suddenly glowed with power. People stepped outside, gasping. Whispers spread. Who did this? Is the council finally helping us? A voice shouted in the crowd. No, this isn't the council. This is her, Relara. The name spread like wildfire. Relara had become a symbol of hope. The council's response. Inside the council's main tower, the high officials watched in silence as surveillance footage showed the lower districts coming to life. One of them slammed his fist on the table. She's turning the people against us. A commander adjusted his helmet. Then we silence her. Orders were sent. Drones and enforcers were deployed. Relara's rebellion had started. The council was ready to crush it. Ambush in the tunnels. Relara and her team barely had time to celebrate before Vec's communicator flashed red. His face paled. They found us. A distant rumbling echoed through the tunnels. Heavy boots. Metal drones hovering. Daniel grabbed his tools. Time to move. But before they could escape, the tunnel entrance exploded. Smoke filled the air as enforcers stormed in. Relara grabbed Vec and pulled him behind cover. Daniel ducked as a drone fired a pulse blast, missing him by inches. Drop your weapons, an enforcer commanded. Relara clenched her fists. They had no weapons, only their minds and their will. Then Daniel grinned. We may not have weapons, but we have power. He pulled out a control module and pressed a button. The underground conduits overloaded. A massive energy pulse surged through the tunnels, knocking out the drones and blinding the enforcers. Relara didn't waste a second. Run. They raced deeper into the tunnels, disappearing into the darkness. The people rise up. Meanwhile, above ground, the city was changing. As news of Relara's power grid spread, the people began to resist. Crowds gathered. Workers stopped obeying orders. The council's control was slipping. When enforcers tried to cut the power, the people stood in their way. No more, they shouted. We have the right to live. The rebellion had begun, and Relara had lit the spark. Relara stood at the edge of the underground hideout, staring at the distant glow of the city. The rebellion had begun. The lower districts had power, the people were rising, and the council was losing control. But now the fight was about to get much harder. Vec ran up to her, his breathing heavy. The enforcers are sending everything they have. Drones, soldiers, pulse cannons. They're planning to wipe us out before sunrise. Daniel checked his tools. We have to stop them before they can attack. If we hit their main control tower, we can shut down their entire command system. Relara nodded. Then let's finish this. Infiltrating the tower. The team moved through dark alleys and hidden tunnels, avoiding patrols. Above them, the sky was filled with searchlights and hovering drones. The council was desperate. As they reached the main control tower, Relara studied the defenses. They have automatic turrets and guards at every entrance. Vec sighed. This is impossible. Daniel smirked. Not if we think like humans. He pulled out a small pulse jammer. This will knock out their sensors for 2 minutes. That's all the time we need. Relara took a deep breath. Then let's move fast. Daniel activated the jammer. The turrets powered down. The drones glitched. They rushed forward. Guards turned in confusion as Relara's team slipped through a side entrance. A heart of the system. Inside, alarms blared. The council knew someone had entered. Daniel hacked into the system. I'm in. Just need a few more seconds. Vec held the door shut. We don't have seconds. Heavy boots pounded the hallways. The enforcers were coming. Relara grabbed a power cell. Then we destroy the system instead. She slammed it into the control core. Sparks exploded. The entire control grid shut down. Across the city, enforcers lost communication. Drones fell from the sky. The council's forces were blinded. The people in the lower districts saw their chance. They stormed the streets, overpowering enforcers, taking back their freedom. The rebellion had won. The council's last move. But the council had one last trick. A voice echoed through the tower. If we can't have control, no one will. A countdown began. Daniel's eyes widened. They're activating the city's self-destruct sequence. Relara froze. They would destroy their own people just to stop us. Vec panicked. How do we stop it? Daniel's fingers flew over the console. I can slow it down, but I can't shut it off. Relara thought fast. Then we reroute the overload. Instead of destroying the city, we make it destroy only the council's tower. Daniel grinned. Now that's thinking like a human. He changed the power flow. The tower's energy core overheated. Lights flickered. The walls shook. Relara grabbed Daniel's hand. Time to go. They raced out as explosions tore through the tower. The council vanished in flames. A new beginning. As the sun rose, the people stood in the streets, staring at the ruins of the council's tower. For the first time, the city was free. Relara stepped forward. We did this together. Vec smiled. What now? Daniel looked at the people. Now, we rebuild. But this time, we do it our way. The crowd cheered. Relara had once been seen as worthless. Now, she was a legend. And thanks to a human, her life had changed forever.